Australia is a country often associated with sunshine, beaches, and a safe lifestyle.
But in February 2020, the entire nation was shaken by one of the most horrific domestic violence cases in its history. This is the story of Hannah Clarke and her three beautiful children Aaliyah, Lyanna, and Trey, whose lives were stolen by the man who was supposed to protect them, Hannah's estranged husband, Rowan Baxter.
This case isn't just about a brutal crime.
It's about the invisible dangers of coercive control, the failures of the system,
and how one family's tragedy sparked a movement for change. Hannah Clarke was just 31 years old.
She was a fitness enthusiast, a bright and positive woman, and above all, a devoted mother. Her three children were her entire world. Aaliyah, 6, the eldest, confident and full of laughter.
Lyanna, 4, cheeky and curious. Trey, 3, the youngest, adored by his sisters. Friends described Hannah as warm, loving, and someone who always put others first.
To outsiders, her family looked normal, even happy.
But behind closed doors, Hannah was living in a nightmare. Rowan Baxter, the abuser.
Rowan Baxter, a former rugby league player and fitness coach, was Hannah's husband. At first, he seemed like the perfect partner. But over time, his true character emerged.
Rowan was controlling, manipulative, and jealous.
He dictated what Hannah could wear, monitored her social life, and constantly criticized her. He isolated her from friends and family, slowly breaking down her confidence. This wasn't the stereotypical abuse people think of with black eyes or broken bones. This was coercive control, psychological and emotional abuse that leaves scars just as deep, and often leads to deadly consequences.
Eventually, Hannah realized she couldn't keep living under Rowan's control.
She separated from him and moved in with her parents.
But separation didn't bring safety. Rowan couldn't accept that Hannah had left.
He stalked her, harassed her, and tried to manipulate the children against her.
Hannah took legal action and got a domestic violence order against him, but that wasn't enough.
Sadly, many women face their most dangerous moments right after leaving an abusive partner, and Hannah's story proved that.
The day of the crime, February 19, 2020. It was a normal Wednesday morning in Camp Hill, Brisbane. Hannah strapped her three kids into the car to drive them to school. Suddenly, Rowan appeared.
Witnesses say he ambushed Hannah, climbed into the car, and doused her and the children with petrol.
Before anyone could react, Rowan lit the car on fire. The vehicle exploded into flames.
Neighbors rushed outside, trying desperately to save the children, smashing windows and screaming for help. But the blaze was too strong. All three children, Aaliyah, Lyanna, and Trey, were trapped inside and died in the fire.
Hannah, engulfed in flames, somehow managed to escape.
With her body covered in burns, she stumbled out, crying,
"He's poured petrol on me."
Rowan stabbed himself nearby and died at the scene.
Hannah's final hours.
Hannah was rushed to the hospital with burns to 97% of her body. Despite unimaginable pain, she was able to tell police what had happened.
Her final concern wasn't for herself but for her children.
In her last words to her mother, Hannah said,
"I'm sorry I couldn't protect them." That night, Hannah passed away, joining her children. National shock.
The murder of Hannah and her children stunned Australia. Vigils were held across the country. Thousands lit candles and placed flowers to honor the young mother and her kids.
People asked, how could this happen? Why wasn't Hannah protected? Why wasn't Rowan stopped, even after clear warning signs?
The case forced the nation to confront the reality of coercive control and how often victims are failed by weak systems.
The inquest.
A later inquest revealed chilling details.
Rowan had a long history of abusive behavior.
Hannah had repeatedly sought help. Police knew about the violence but failed to prevent escalation. The findings showed how dangerous coercive control can be even without obvious physical violence. It's often a red flag for future tragedy.
In their grief, Hannah's parents, Sue and Lloyd Clarke, turned their pain into purpose.
They founded the Small Steps for Hannah Foundation to raise awareness about coercive control and domestic abuse. They became advocates for stronger laws, better education, and more support for survivors. Their tireless work has already inspired changes in Queensland, including moves to criminalize coercive control.
The story of Hannah Clarke is more than just a crime. It's a lesson.
She was a daughter, a friend, and a loving mother who gave everything for her children. The system failed her, but her story now stands as a warning and a call to action. Hannah's legacy lives on in the movement she inspired, a push for change so no other family suffers the way hers did.
In true crime, we often hear about horrific murders and the monsters who commit them. But sometimes, the real horror isn't just the crime itself, it's when an innocent person is trapped, punished, and destroyed by the justice system.
This is the shocking true story of Andrew Mallard, a man who spent 12 years in prison for a murder he didn't commit. His case exposed corruption, negligence, and one of the most shameful miscarriages of justice in Australian history.
The murder of Pamela Lawrence.
It began on May 23, 1994, in Perth, Western Australia. Pamela Lawrence, a 45-year-old jeweler, was working alone in her Mossman Park shop. She was respected, successful, and had no known enemies.
That afternoon, Pamela was brutally attacked.
She suffered multiple head injuries and died on the floor of her store. Police rushed to the scene, and the community was shocked.
The pressure to solve the crime quickly was immense.
The public wanted answers, and the police wanted a suspect.
Enter Andrew Mallard. Andrew Mallard was 32 years old at the time. He wasn't a hardened criminal.
In fact, he was a troubled but harmless man dealing with mental health struggles, drifting through life, and often misunderstood.
He had no connection to Pamela Lawrence.
He didn't know her, had never been in her shop, and there was no evidence linking him to the murder. But because he was vulnerable, eccentric, and on the police radar for minor issues, Andrew became an easy target.
The police interrogation.
Instead of carefully building a case with evidence, police zeroed in on Andrew. They interrogated him for hours.
Andrew, who was already in a fragile mental state, gave confused answers.
At times, he speculated about how the crime might have been committed. He talked about weapons, possible motives, not as confessions, but as guesses. But the police twisted his words. They recorded only parts of the interviews. Crucial pieces of evidence that pointed to his innocence were withheld from the defense.
The so-called confession they presented was nothing more than a patchwork of manipulated statements. The trial. In 1995, Andrew Mallard went to trial for the murder of Pamela Lawrence.
The jury was told he had confessed. They were shown selective evidence, while other critical information was hidden.
For example, forensic reports suggested the murder weapon was a wrench. But Andrew had speculated about a hammer.
This alone should have raised doubts. Instead, prosecutors presented his speculation as proof of guilt.
The jury, convinced by the prosecution's version, found Andrew guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. Life behind bars. Andrew was sent to prison for a crime he didn't commit.
He spent 12 years behind bars, surrounded by real killers and criminals. He maintained his innocence the entire time. He wrote letters, filed appeals, and begged anyone to listen. But years passed, and his pleas were ignored. Imagine losing over a decade of your life, your freedom, your family, your future, all while knowing you are innocent.
That was Andrew's reality.
The fight for justice.
Fortunately, Andrew wasn't completely forgotten. His family never gave up on him.
They kept fighting, contacting lawyers, and pushing for the case to be re-examined.
Eventually, investigative journalists and advocates took notice. The case reached the High Court of Australia.
In 2005, the court reviewed the evidence and the truth began to emerge. It was revealed that the prosecution had withheld crucial evidence from Andrew's defense team.
Evidence that directly undermined the case against him. Evidence that could have changed the verdict entirely. Freedom at last. After 12 long years, Andrew Mallard's conviction was quashed.
In 2006, he was finally released from prison.
For Andrew, it was a moment of both joy and bitterness.
He had his freedom, but he had lost so much. A huge part of his life was gone forever. The real killer of Pamela Lawrence was later identified through DNA, a man named Simon Rockford, who had committed suicide in 2006 after being linked to another murder.
This confirmed what Andrew had always said: he was innocent. The fallout.
The Mallard case became a national scandal. Questions were raised about police conduct, prosecutorial ethics, and how the justice system could fail so badly.
It was revealed that
evidence had been deliberately suppressed.
The so-called confession was unreliable. The prosecution had misled the jury. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a catastrophic miscarriage of justice.
Andrew was eventually awarded millions in compensation, but no amount of money could give him back the years he lost.
Life after prison.
After his release, Andrew tried to rebuild his life. He became an advocate for justice reform and wrongful conviction cases. But his freedom was tragically short-lived.
In April 2019, Andrew Mallard was killed in Los Angeles in a hit-and-run accident. He was 56 years old. His death added yet another cruel twist to an already heartbreaking story. Legacy.
Andrew Mallard's case remains one of Australia's most infamous wrongful convictions. It highlights how dangerous it is when police rush to solve a case, when evidence is hidden, and when vulnerable people are pressured into false statements.
Andrew's story is a reminder that justice isn't just about punishing the guilty, it's about protecting the innocent. And when the system fails, the consequences can destroy lives. Conclusion.
The murder of Pamela Lawrence was tragic. But the wrongful conviction of Andrew Mallard made it even worse.
One innocent man's life was stolen, while the real killer walked free for years.
Andrew's fight for justice exposed deep flaws in the system, and although he eventually cleared his name, he never truly got back what was taken from him. When people think of vampires, they imagine horror movies or old legends. But in 1989, the city of Brisbane, Australia, was shaken by a real-life murder that sounded like it came straight out of a nightmare.
This is the story of Tracy Wigginton, a woman who earned the chilling nickname, the Vampire Killer. The background.
Tracy Wigginton was 24 years old. She came from a troubled childhood, full of instability and pain. By her early 20s, she was deeply involved in the occult, fascinated by blood rituals, and obsessed with the idea of becoming a vampire. Her friends said she claimed to need blood to survive.
Some even believed she had supernatural powers. Tracy used this dark persona to control and manipulate others. The murder.
On the night of October 20, 1989, Tracy and 3 female accomplices lured a 47-year-old man named Edward Baldock. He was a father of 4, enjoying drinks with friends before crossing paths with the group. The women offered him a lift home.
Instead, they drove him to a dark riverbank.
There, in the shadows, Tracy Wigginton launched her attack. She stabbed Edward 27 times, killing him in a frenzy of bloodlust.
Afterward, she drank his blood. It was brutal, shocking, and unlike anything Australia had ever seen. The trial.
When police caught Tracy and her accomplices, the case made international headlines. Newspapers called her a real-life vampire. During the trial, chilling details emerged about her obsession with the occult, her manipulation of her friends, and her cold lack of remorse.
Tracy Wigginton was sentenced to life imprisonment for murder.
Her accomplices received lesser sentences for their roles in the killing.
Life behind bars. In prison, Tracy's dark reputation followed her. But after decades inside, she eventually applied for parole. Despite public outrage, she was released in 2012, after serving 22 years. Her release reignited fear and anger. How could someone who committed such a brutal, senseless act be allowed to walk free? Legacy. The case of Tracy Wigginton remains one of Australia's most disturbing crimes. It wasn't just the murder, it was the ritualistic, almost theatrical cruelty of it.
Even today, the name Vampire Killer sends chills down the spine, a grim reminder that sometimes reality can be stranger and scarier than fiction. Few crimes are more horrifying than when a parent kills their own children. In Australia, one such case shocked the nation and left people struggling to understand how a father could commit such an unthinkable act.
This is the story of Robert Farquharson, the man who murdered his 3 young sons on Father's Day. The background. Robert Farquharson lived in Victoria. By 2005, his marriage to Cindy Gambino had ended, leaving him bitter, resentful, and unable to accept the separation. He felt his wife had moved on too quickly and, according to prosecutors, wanted revenge. Sadly, the ones who paid the price were his children. The crime, Father's Day, 2005. On the evening of September 4, 2005, Robert was driving his 3 sons, Jai, 10, Tyler, 7, and Bailey, 2, back to their mother after a day together. As they drove near Winchelsea, Robert deliberately steered his car off the Prince's Highway and into a dam. The car sank into the dark water with the children trapped inside. Robert managed to escape, swimming to safety. But his 3 sons drowned. Later, when questioned, Robert claimed he had blacked out due to a coughing fit and lost control of the car. But investigators and prosecutors argued otherwise, that this was no accident, but cold-blooded murder. The trial. The trial revealed chilling details. Witnesses said Robert had previously spoken about wanting to hurt his wife by taking away what she loved most, her children. The prosecution argued that the drowning was revenge against Cindy. The jury agreed. In 2007, Robert Farquharson was found guilty of murdering his 3 sons and sentenced to life in prison without parole. Appeals and retrial. Robert fought back, appealing his conviction. His defense insisted the crash was accidental. In 2010, the Court of Appeal overturned the original verdict, and he was granted a retrial. But in 2010, after the retrial, he was found guilty again. The jury once more believed the evidence showed deliberate murder. Legacy. The Farquharson case remains one of Australia's most infamous family tragedies. Cindy Gambino, the boy's mother, was devastated but later said she forgave Robert, though she never stopped grieving her children. For the public, the story was almost too horrific to believe, a father using Father's Day, a day meant to celebrate love, to commit an act of ultimate betrayal. Robert Farquharson will spend the rest of his life in prison, remembered as the father who drowned his children out of spite. In July 2009, one of the most shocking mass murders in Australian history occurred inside a quiet suburban home in Epping, Sydney. 5 members of the same family were brutally slaughtered in their sleep. The crime scene was so violent that investigators struggled to describe it. This is the horrifying story of the Lynn family murders. The victims. The victims were Min Lin, 45, who ran a successful news agency. His wife Yunli Lily Lin, 43. Their 2 sons, Henry, 12, and Terry, 9. Min's sister-in-law, Irene Lin, 39. All 5 were found beaten to death in their beds. The only survivor in the household was Kathy Lin, Min's sister, because she had been staying elsewhere that night. The crime scene. On the morning of July 18, 2009, Kathy Lin and her husband Robert Xie discovered the bodies. The walls were splattered with blood. The victims had been struck repeatedly with a hammer-like object. The killer had moved through the house methodically, making sure no one survived. It was a massacre that stunned Australia not just because of the brutality, but because it happened in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. The investigation. From the start, suspicion turned toward Robert Xie, the brother-in-law of the victims. He had married Kathy Lin, making him Min Lin's brother-in-law. Detectives uncovered tensions between Robert and Min. Robert resented Min's success and felt overshadowed. There were whispers of jealousy, financial struggles, and simmering family disputes. Police also found forensic evidence, tiny traces of blood in Robert Xie's garage, linked to the crime scene. The trial. The case dragged on for years, with multiple trials and appeals. It was one of the most complex in Australian history. In 2017, after a long and grueling legal battle, Robert Xie was found guilty of 5 counts of murder. The jury agreed he had crept into the Lin family home at night and killed them with a homemade hammer-like weapon. His motive? A toxic mix of jealousy, resentment, and hatred toward his in-laws. Robert Xie was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Legacy. The Lin family murders remain one of Australia's darkest crimes. It wasn't a stranger or an intruder, it was someone they knew, someone they trusted, who wiped out an entire family. The tragedy left a permanent scar on the Chinese-Australian community and serves as a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes from inside the family itself.